Hi, welcome to the Daiku Podcast. I'm Gary Snow. Joining me today is Jason Connerly. He's the host of the Nerds RPG Variety Podcast, and I've been a regular listener to it since 2019. Recently, Jason made some changes to the format, and we're going to be talking all about that, as well as the history and legacy of the show. So, Jason, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Gary. I really appreciate it.
And like I said, I'm a huge fan of the show. I listen to it as much as I can, but you had a really regular schedule, and often I couldn't keep up to it, and it probably took a lot of time to create those episodes. And so we're going to be talking about all those format changes, and why you've made them and what to expect. But first of all, as always, how did you get into this crazy little hobby of ours?
That's a great question. I think, like a lot of people, I got in with the Menser Basic set, the D&D Basic set, and this would have been probably 84, Christmas 84. It might have been, yeah, it was probably Christmas 84. My mom gave it to me, actually. I was a single child, or, later on through marriage, I have stepsisters and stuff. But at the time, single child. And, I had friends and things, but we moved a fair bit. So it was one of those kind of lonely, fun things initially, where I'd play with my cousins when I saw them. And then I got a group and we played with local people after that. But we had the D&D Menser Basic set, which was great introduction to the hobby with the solo game in there, everything else. But quickly moved on to the next game I got was Marvel Superheroes, TSR.
So before we get into Marvels,
yep. Yeah.
What was the immediate draw for you, or put yourself back in your shoes of as far as did you know about D&D ahead of that and you got the set, or was it completely just I'm opening a present and this is what I got?
So that's a good question, and I was aware of D&D superficially, not from knowing other people playing it, but I don't remember what year ET was. Maybe ET was, but because it was obviously an ET. I had seen the Monster Manual. So we had, game stores back then. You had Toys R Us. I don't know if you had those in Canada, but Toys R Us, and they would have a shelf, a rack of D&D books. And I remember the Monster Manual, and seeing the books. But I did Choose Your Own Adventure books, which are kind of like fighting fantasy books for those that know those, except you're not rolling dice or anything. You're just reading a paragraph and then choosing a thing. And I'd done Choose Your Own Adventure books. And I don't think I asked for it, though. I think she just got it. I don't know if she talked to somebody else or where she got the idea. But from there on out, it was, role-playing games and still board games and things. But it was... I got into role-playing games pretty quickly and pretty heavily at that point.
And as a young kid growing up, were you I've listened to your podcast enough to know you have a extensive library of movies and pop culture that you've been a fan of. Were you primed for that kind of exposure to the box set, where you were hey, I watch all the Conan movies, all the fantasy movies, all that kind of thing? Were you a kid that explored all that to begin with?
To some degree. Now I was, 10. I was 11, I guess, when I got the set, 10 or 11, or I would have been 11 at that time. So obviously, a lot of the sword and sorcery movies and stuff I key into today, I was a little young for those at that point. I mean, I remember when Clash of the Titans came out, seeing that and having my eyes covered when in the beginning where you see her bare bottom, when you see Percy's mother's bare bottom, right? But I always enjoyed those kind of fantasy things, and I've got fond memories of watching all that on HBO and Cinemax and all the streaming services once those came out. And I've still got tons of, you can't really see well, but I've still got a ton of VHS tapes and taped things, which from TV and all that kind of thing.
So. I remember the Clash of the Titans, that was really influential for me. I remember the back of the cereal box. I forget what cereal it was, but as a kid, you sit there and you eat your cereal and look at the box, and they had those little plastic transfers and of the creatures and the Kraken and all that kind of stuff. And I was making my own little scenes and stuff like that. Oh, anyways, I love that kind of time and era of being a kid, and the fantasy that the worlds of D&D provide you. you said you played with your cousins. Like, when did you
Mhm.
actually start expanding past like starting to have a cohort of friends to play with?
Oh, probably 86, honestly. I was already buying different games before then, but probably because I'm thinking when we moved, and when we moved to Wilmington, Delaware, would probably be the time. And then later on, we moved up into southeastern Pennsylvania, outside Philadelphia. And then, I had a solid group then because at that point, once I got into middle school, high school, we um, had a solid group. But before that, it was kind of off and on. But I was still getting the games and accumulating this library of, like, say, Marvel superheroes, Top Secret, the different TSR games. I don't think it was until a few years later. Well, I don't know. I'd have to go back and look because I had, before the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie and cartoon came out, I did have the RPG. So, and that was my first Palladium game, and then Palladium and Merp kind of drew me away from D&D, which we had, I'd moved on. I had the advanced D&D books, like most people. As soon as you see the advanced books, you move past basic to advanced because
Yeah,
it's
that's for kids.
advanced.
That's for
Yeah, it's for
kids. Yeah.
kids. Although we kind of mix and match stuff, but to digress here a little bit, and I apologize. This is a facet of podcasting as opposed to video. So folks will have to forgive me because don't normally do the video thing. But you talk about cereal boxes. My favorite cereal box thing like that was they used to put records on there. They'd be square records you could put in your record player. And
Oh,
I had one
really?
for Marvel did for Man Thing. And it was the origin of Man Thing where Ted Salas, I think, turned into the Man Thing. And but you cut it out from the box. It was a square cardboard record, but it actually worked. It's kind of crazy.
Huh? I
But
had no idea that they ever did that. That's fascinating.
yeah.
But I miss those like the weird things that they cooked up to
Hmm.
put in the cereal and like all the interactivity and the maps and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a kid, you could just like I could spend hours just sitting there and just like staring at cereal
Hmm.
boxes. It was just such an important part of like being a kid, I think, at that time. I don't think they even do that anymore. Do they put stuff in cereal boxes?
I don't know if they put anything in. I know you still have games on the outside. You'll have maps and you'll have different things on the outside. I don't know because I don't buy kids cereal anymore. At Halloween, I'll go and I'll typically go and get a box of each of the monster cereals, right? Frankenberry and Count Chocolate.
Yeah.
I'll get a box of each of those every year in October to eat. But that's about it for kids cereal these days.
Get the nostalgia vibe going,
Yeah.
and that kind of thing. And then you talked about like all those other games, Marvel and Top Secret and
Hmm.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I think was just a part of your recent episode you were talking about after the bomb.
Hmm.
Um, and so, from your perspective, like one of my things on the channel is obviously I really like indie games and old school games, obviously. But was it hard to get people to play games other than D&D, like or
No, it's interesting because back then we played a little bit of everything, and we were kind of like you hear the Grodnark files talk, and you hear Dirk and Blythe talk about how everybody had their own game, and like each one would buy their game, and nobody else was allowed to buy that game, and we weren't totally like we were mostly like that. I mean, everybody kind of had their thing, and they were willing to play, as long as somebody was willing to run it, and as kids in school, it's crazy, but you had so much more time, or at least it seems like you had so much more time to play. I mean, we didn't have the internet or anything back then, so maybe that helped. But yeah, we just seem to have plenty of time to play that, or to play whether it's Axis and Allies or Squad Leader, or these board games, and that were you played all night long, on
yeah.
the weekends, and yeah.
Well, it sounds like we had a similar upbringing because our time, like obviously no internet at that time, and our
Mhm.
our group gaming group was basically we flipped between D&D and Palladium Heroes and the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and played Risk and Car Wars and like all the the kind of the fun games that were kicking around in the 80s. But there was like a limited amount, and like in today we almost have like a plethora of games that like to choose from that it's tough to actually find the attention to actually commit to any single game because there's just so much content.
It is. It's tough. To really run a game well, it helps to have system mastery of the game. And if you're switching game systems all the time, trying to play all these new games that are coming out, you'll never get system mastery. Another one of the Anchor podcasters, I'm sure we'll talk about Anchor here in a little bit, Carl Rodriguez, the Geomologist Presents. He's got a YouTube channel now as well. Go check it out, folks. But he runs a lot of different games, like a ton of different games, like a different game every night. I mean, they're in the same rotation, but he has like 5 or 6 different systems he runs regularly. And a few years ago, when I was playing with him quite a bit, he would run a lot of BRP based games, a lot of Chaosium games, and then a lot of Savage Worlds games. And in those games, especially the Savage Worlds games, the attributes are named slightly different things, even though it all works the same. They have slightly different names, and he would always say the wrong one. It's not, it's just because you mix them up, and we'd always give him a hard time over that. But when you look at some, especially OSR, you talk about indie stuff in OSR games. If you're playing 2 different hacks of Swords and Wizardry, you're playing 2 different versions of BX, then it's very easy to kind of get those mixed up. Is this a game where we go below 0 hit points, or is this not that game? Or, do we have Sundered Shields rule in this game or not? And so it's, if you're playing a bunch of different games, it can be tough to keep the rules straight.
And were you able to maintain like a steady history of gaming as you turned into an adult, or was there blips and blops of like spikes of playing and then long periods of not?
There were. So at a high school, I joined the Army at 17 and I went in the Army, and I was able to find groups to play with in the Army. So I played throughout those years. And then when I got out of the Army, I had through the early 2000s, I was playing. And then once we hit those early 2000s, I had a break. Or that's not true. It would have been 97, roughly 98. 97, 98, I had a break. I guess that really started the break. And then up through when my son was old enough to get him into it. So that would have been around 2006 or so. Google Plus was going, and I was somewhat active in some of the Google Plus stuff, although not as a name or anything, but posting. Mm-hmm. So I had about a 10-year break, but not nearly as much as a lot of people. And we, with my son, I introduced him, and at the time we were still doing face-to-face gaming, and we were in Northern Virginia at the time. So, I would go find a group, and interestingly enough, we're talking AD&D first edition groups or BX groups. I never played. I got out of D&D prior to second edition coming out, before the Rule Cyclopedia was published, actually. So I never had the Rule Cyclopedia second edition, never played third edition. When I got back in, I wasn't attracted to the new version at all. And I just fell right in with the old games with Google Plus, right into the OSR stuff. And so I missed that whole era, the D20 era, kind of. I bypassed that because in the 90s, we were playing Cyberpunk 2020, Warhammer Fantasy, and still AD&D, because I linked up with people that were still big fans of AD&D. We had Arduin Grimoire, and, so we were playing that kind of stuff.
And when you originally started thinking of like, I'm trying to put together the Google Plus time frame, and then also you starting your own podcast, what was the initial kind of like nugget that made you go, hey, I'm gonna do this?
So it's interesting. So I did have another little break there. So we started, like I said, probably around 2000. I'm trying to think the time frame. Maybe 2007 is when I started introducing my son, and we kind of got into role-playing games a little bit. And then I linked up with a good friend who was more into board games. And we also got into miniature war gaming. And so we kind of had a break from role-playing games, going to local miniature wargaming conventions, because we were in Virginia, but up in Pennsylvania, they have a lot of the historical miniatures at Gaming Society. That's it. HMGS have a lot of conventions, wargaming conventions. So we'd go to those, and board gaming conventions. We're playing board gaming. And so we actually fell out of role-playing games for a while. I'd still keep my finger on the pulse of it and all, but we weren't actually playing. And then in the mid 20-teens, so like 2016 or 2017, kind of got back into it, started playing online a little bit. I was introduced to Barbarians of Lemuria by linking up people through Google Plus, and before that died. And we were playing a little bit there. And then maybe 2018 or early 2019, I started hearing some of these Anchor podcasts. And Anchor, although it's about to go away, depending when this is released, it may have already gone away, be sunset of it. At the time, Spotify didn't know Anchor. And Anchor was this app you could record on your phone. You could easily call to other podcasts through that app on your phone. So you could just pick up your phone and call a message into one of these other podcasts, and they could record the podcast on their phone, edit the podcast on their phone, and publish it from their phone. So it was really convenient. And we did what was called guerrilla podcasting, where a lot of the podcasts, you're just walking around recording this podcast and sending it. It's not polished or anything. And so I kind of got listened to a bunch of these Anchor role-playing game podcasts. I think the first one I called into might have been Thought Eater, which was Frostsoft's podcast. And he stopped for personal reasons, family reasons a while back. And that kind of encouraged me. I was listening to all these podcasts, and I was calling into the podcasts. And of course, the joke back then was, with Anchor, if you start calling into a bunch of podcasts, you might as well just start your own podcast. So I did. And I'd have to look now. It was like November, I think, of 2019, somewhere around there is when I actually started it.
Yeah, one of the things that I enjoyed, well, first of all, Anchor was amazing because it made podcasting easy, because there's always that kind of like, I don't even know how to start a podcast, as far as like, do I upload things? Do I not? Like Anchor, like the entry point, the barrier to entry was like reduced so much. And that's how I got started too, is on Anchor. I was like, wow, this is easy. Finally, suddenly. And then secondly, I really enjoyed the community that was kind of building up in and around the Anchor community and the guerrilla podcasting community. And I loved the fact that, like, I'd listen to another podcast and I hear you, and then like you could, like, it was almost like all these like guest spots, like you'd see like maybe in a Marvel movie, where Spider-Man shows up in one scene and a different Marvel movie and that kind of thing. So it was fun to kind of hear and go with the community. And how important was that to you, as far as like, did you know any of these community members that were also doing their podcast, or did it just stem from that?
Yeah, it all stemmed from that. And pretty early on, I got on the Audio Dungeon Discord, and that's still out there. At the time, Jason Hobbs and Jose were both doing it, and Jose is still managing that. So I got into calling and met these people that way. And I've actually met, like, Carl Rodriguez, I've met in person through, either for work trips or other reasons, been down to Texas, and I've met him in person. He is the only podcaster I've met in person at this point. But am good friends now, internet friends, but good friends with a number of the different podcasters, and stay in touch, outside of podcasting with a number of people. We built some good friendships through that. But yeah, jumping the Audio Dungeon Discord, then in addition to the calls of the podcasts, we had that connection on the Discord, and that's still up and going, and there's still a number of podcasters on there, which is great. And not only do you have that community spirit, but it's a pretty welcoming community, which is good.
And so I went back in your history, and so I saw that the pilot episode was September 2019.
Okay. So a little bit earlier.
And so for me, I was like, oh, like, listen, I listened to your pilot just in preparation for the show, and like at that point, you were kind of still kind of feeling your way through, like, well, what is this going to look like? Why did I start this, and that kind of thing? Maybe can you reflect back upon like what you thought it was going to be, and then kind of what it turned out to be for you?
Yeah. So my initial thought was, as the name suggests, a variety show. Something like Hee Haw might not be a great reference for international or
we're gonna have to
modern
like
audience.
age limit that down a bit.
My references, right? But well, think of In Living Color, maybe, or even that's probably old for some. But any of these shows, or Saturday Night Live, any show with a bunch of little segments in it, right? So that was kind of my thought initially, which I'd been influenced by radio shows like Saturday morning and weekday morning radio shows growing up, where they would do little segments. In Philadelphia, there's a radio station where they did, it was one of those comedy radio shows where they do little comedic sketches between music and news and traffic and all that. And so that was like a big influence to me. And I wanted to kind of recreate that and have different segments. And for a long time, I never really got it. And I'm still trying to capture that. And we'll see that as the podcast evolved. But what it quickly turned into, initially I was thinking, well, I'll do a little segment, like a little war game segment, a little RPG segment, a little movie segment in each episode. And there are some episodes I tried that, but quickly we got calls coming in, and calls started, the listener feedback coming in, and listener feedback started to drive the show. And it very much has up to this point, because you want to interact, and it's addictive interacting with listeners. And these podcasts, especially back in the day of Anchor, and we've kind of kept it up with other programs now, so people still have a way to send calls in. it's like an audio blog where you read a blog and you have the comments section in the blog and
Mhm.
people are communicating and talking in the blog section. That's what these podcasts end up being with the calls. And you end up with so many calls sometimes that's the whole, your whole show is just responding to calls or callers responding to other callers. And I was lucky enough to have people call into the show and call in talking to other people's calls. And so we ended up with, sometimes whole shows where people just, without me really even being involved, and that was great, having that community, be able to build that community that way.
And then, for those that might not know, Spotify ended up buying Anchor
Mm-hmm.
and then incorporating it into the Spotify app, and they've over time kind of gotten rid of Anchor, and now it's just kind of Spotify. And I don't even know if they have the call-in feature anymore in the new
They
Spotify app.
don't. So they don't. What they've done is the Anchor app was supposed to be is supposed to already been gone. Now, as far as I understand, on July 9th, 2024, they're going to sunset that app. And they've got a new company, a new program app they bought from that was already developed from another company called Riverside. And they picked that up and want people to use that instead. The problem is you can record you on your phone using Riverside, but you can't edit. They recently did an update where they said you could edit podcasts or edit the content on your phone. I can't figure out how to do it. So it's not too convenient. And you still can't publish from your phone. So the problem is now you have to go to your laptop or your PC. And for most of us, let's be honest, for most of us, that's kind of what you would call a first world problem. The idea that, oh, geez, it's so tough. I have to go to my PC. But there are a lot of people in the world that their phone is their computer.
Yeah.
They don't own a laptop. They don't own a PC. They have a phone. And Anchor let them do podcasts and share with the world by just using their phone. And I think that's huge. And I think that's really important. And so what Spotify has done is remove that. Sorry, I'm on a soapbox, but I think taking that away from people is a big deal. And we have some podcasters even that are affected, like Rob over Down the Heap. He does everything off an old tablet and his iPhone, or I don't know if he has an iPhone, but his phone and an old tablet. And so when they do this change, his podcast, he's not going to be able to do it anymore, at least not through Spotify. And then you have other people like Joe Ricker, Hindsightless, who, because he's sight impaired and has to use tools to help him do things, changing programs that he's using is a big pain in the butt because, how accessible is it for him?
Yeah.
So by taking away the ability to do everything on the phone, some of these podcasts are probably going to go away. It's kind of sad, but I think I got off track from your question. Sorry about that.
Well, that's okay, but, I guess, like, I just wanted you to maybe reflect upon, like, the impact you've had. I mean, based upon the amount of people calling into your show, like, listeners like me that, I might not have
Mhm.
called in, but I was always, like, actively kind of enjoying the discussion in the community. And then you also had, different features like, Movie Mondays. In
Mhm.
particular, I was thinking of, the Walter Hill, stretch that you did. I don't know how many episodes you did for Walter Hill, but for me, I wasn't a huge knowledgeable person about his library, but I loved the Warriors. And so for me,
Mhm.
I was like, all right, I love the Warriors and like the whole history behind that. But you actually took it to a whole new level and just like really discussed his whole like library. And how did that idea come to you as far as incorporating the Movie Mondays and the topics that you would choose?
Yeah. So, like I said, I always want to do kind of the variety thing and not just be a gaming podcast. And I never really had a big interest in being an actual. There are other people out there who do actual play podcasts. They do a great job, and that's wonderful. I'm not trying to chase the rabbit on that. I want to kind of do my own thing. And so that's always been more of a general pop culture show where mostly it's role playing games, but I also like movies. I like, cult movies. So we'll talk about these cult movies and we'll talk about other things. And so there are episodes and movie discussions way back throughout the whole history of the show. But every now and then I want to change things up and think, well, what can I do for a new segment or new this? And so I was trying different things. And then last year, December of 2022, I guess, or at the end of 2022, it might not have been December, it might have been November, but Albert Pune died. And Albert Pune did Cyborg and all these other movies. And I decided in, respect to him, I would do a retrospective and for a whole year, every month I would do a show looking at one of his movies. And then when we came up for this year, I decided to do that for Walter Hill. So that's how the Walter Hill thing started. And there are more Walter Hill discussions coming up. So, you have that to look forward to. But the Movie Mondays actually were from another podcaster and an RPG designer, Goblin's Henchman. Goblin's Henchman has done a ton of things with the hex flowers and a lot of really neat things with math. If you go to Goblin's Henchman's blog, you'll see all this great stuff, and there's a lot of free products. But for a while, Goblin's Henchman did a podcast as well, but he never really was big into the podcast part. But he had suggested on the Audio Dungeon Discord we should do a Movie Monday where he didn't call it Movie Monday, but he said every month we should watch a movie from the 80s and get everybody to call in and have a show that played all those calls. And I kind of got nominated to host that. So that's where the Movie Monday came from. It was actually his idea, and then I ended up hosting it. And basically, we would pick a movie. The first one was Clash of the Titans, actually, and we put a call out to everybody, just call in your ideas, and everybody called in. I put them all together, and then once a month I'd publish that. Now this year, I knew my podcast was probably going to end or change, so I passed it on to Spencer or Free Throw over at Keep Off the Borderlands podcast. It was a great podcast, and he's been doing a great job keeping Movie Monday going and keeping the idea going. I'm very thankful to him for picking that torch up and keeping alive. And I'd actually, he obviously can do it as long as he wants, but it'd be neat if it would bounce around once a year, once every 2 years or so to different podcasts, and kind of keep as a community thing, keep it alive as a community where it's not just the thing of one podcast.
Yeah. And I guess, like, in reflecting upon even like me reaching out to you and going, hey, I'd love you to be a guest on the show. Part of that was driven by the fact that you had announced that you were shuttering the podcast in general. And I was like, well, I'm a big fan. I want to kind of do honor to the podcast and all the time that you put into it. Can you just talk to us about like the decision and then now maybe subsequent changes that have come from that?
Sure. So due to some work constraints, some family constraints, we're in the process of moving my mother in with us. So we were having to build an in-law suite onto the house and some other things. I was feeling a time crunch. Podcasting takes, and obviously YouTube, I'm sure, takes more time than podcasting does because you're video editing in addition to what we're doing with editing. And I don't edit a whole lot for the podcast, I'll be honest. It's still very guerrilla. But that said, podcasting takes a lot of time. And whether it's listening to calls or recording the podcast or editing the podcast, and it's not something you can do in the living room with your wife while she's watching TV or with your husband while he's watching TV, right? So it's one of those things that I was feeling the pull that because I was putting out 2 to 3 shows a week, I'm locked in the bedroom away from my family, not interacting with my family, for a number of hours every week. And while I enjoy having private time, I have a long commute as well. So that's when I can listen to all these podcasts and call in, particularly if I can call in on the phone because I've got this long commute. But I wanted to get away from an activity that was so time draining from my family. And I know that doesn't sound good grammatically. Sorry, folks. But I had opened up a blog. It was playing with the blog. And I haven't done a great job keeping that alive, but it's still there, and I'm still slowly putting out things on the blog. The advantage of the blog is I can sit on the couch with my wife. She's watching TV, and I can be working on the blog next to her. So I'm still there in the room. I'm still interacting with her while I'm doing that. I can't do that while I'm recording podcasts. But I didn't want to totally stop. So that's why it was kind of a soft stop when I let you guys know that, yeah, things are going to change, but I might come back. I wasn't sure, but this is what I enjoy of podcasting is talking to other people. And I think I've done enough shows over the past 4.5 years or so where I've been a talking head, just kind of giving my ideas out that I don't have a big desire to do that anymore, but I do enjoy the interaction, whether it's interacting with listeners when they send in feedback or having a guest on and talking with them. So I decided to reformat the show where it's going to come out once every 2 weeks on the every odd Sunday of the month. So if there's 5 Sundays in the month, there'll be 3 shows that month. And the majority of it will be segments that are recorded with a guest. and that's the new format. And still playing listener calls, all that kind of thing. And I've really enjoyed doing that because what's let me do is I've got shows recorded now. June is done, July is done, and I've got content for early August. And because I'll sit there and it's kind of like a flurry, like in a few days I can record a month's worth of episodes, and then it frees up my time to spend with my family after that, which is wonderful. So that's kind of why I changed up the format.
And then going back to the whole variety thing, it how are you gonna like? Do you have ideas for like even more kind of weird variety pieces and discussions and that kind of thing?
Uh, yeah, every show I'm trying to do at least some RPG content and some movie content. I think it's okay to have because it ends up being an RPG show, and most of my listeners are listening for the role playing game content. Let's be honest. All movie episodes don't always go over very well, which is okay. I'm not so worried about the numbers. If I have an episode that's not listened to as much as the other episodes, that doesn't really bother me. I look at listener numbers. I look at the numbers, but I don't really worry about them. I'm not worried about, well, this did really good, so I should do it again. But if I get listener feedback saying, hey, I really like that, then I will try to do it again.
Mhm.
But so the episodes, like the episodes I put out so far with the new format, have a mixture of role-playing game and movie content. Now, the fifth Sunday of the month is always going to be something special and a little bit oddball. And we've got that for the end of June. I don't know when this episode's coming out, so I don't know if I'm talking future or
Well,
past.
I'll probably turn this around in the next few days. So today's June 20th. It'll
Okay.
probably be out quick here, I think.
Yeah. So the fifth Sunday of June is a show all about scientific ghost movies. We're talking about movies where they try to use science to explain ghosts. And I've got KR King of D&D Homebrew on with me. But there's not really any RPG content in that one. It's 3 hours it's 2 hours. 2 hours of just talking about three different these weird movies. But then when we get to July, we're going to go right back into having gaming content and movie content. And sometimes those things will be connected, sometimes they won't. I've got a special episode coming out in the early July that's going to look at summer blockbuster movies. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But I don't know if I'm going to try anything. We're going to see. It's going to depend on listener feedback. It's depend on whether I get a lot of it. Also, is if I get bored and want to try something different, I'll do that. But I'm not going to get bored of talking about movies or games. But that's not to say there's not going to be a war gaming special or a board game special or something else.
And I mean, I guess one of the missing pieces that you left out, and probably because I know you're very humble, is that there is a huge outcry of like people that did not want you to shutter the podcast because they were enjoying it. And how did that make you feel? Because I mean, I saw it online, and what people were saying is that no, like we enjoy this. It's a shame. We understand, obviously, family commitments and time frames and that kind of stuff. And I don't think people really appreciate how much work usually goes into what for all of us, including myself, is just a hobby. I just enjoy talking about games and that kind of thing. And were you surprised by the outcry of people that wanted you to keep it going, or at least honor like how much work you put into it?
Yes, and not just at that point, but throughout the show's life, I've been reached out to by listeners, and sometimes they've sent me things. I've got game books and different things that I've been sent, by fans, and it's always very touching. And that is definitely what keeps me going. If I didn't have the interaction with the listeners, I wouldn't be doing this. As much as I enjoy talking about movies, I don't have to do a recorded talk with somebody about a movie. You and I can be on the phone or whatever and talk about movies. But because the listener feedback is huge, and I've been touched quite a bit over the years by the generosity of the listeners and how much they enjoy it. And that definitely was part of my decision to start up this new format because of that outreach from the listeners, 100%. I guess one other thing I didn't mention that we kind of skipped, I did back in past years, I might pick up again. It's a little tough right now because we're actually kind of strapped for money because our construction project went way over budget. But and for some other reasons. But I used to do contests quite a bit, and I would do have a contest to call in with your favorite whatever, there were different contest things, but I never picked the best thing. We'd always randomly pick a winner, and then I would give them a gift certificate, drive through RPG, and then we would donate money to a charity of their choice. And I really enjoyed doing that. And I'd like to get back to that. And I probably will get back to doing that, because I mean, I do budget money to give to charity anyway, but it's neat to do it interactively, with other people. And so I would like to get back to the contest aspect, but it's probably going to be the end of this year or next year before I can really ramp that back up, just because of, everything's going on, in my real life.
It'd be remiss if I didn't talk about your opening themes and different versions of them over the years. Can you tell us how that came to be? Because I don't know anybody in this hobby, or podcaster, video person, that has their own theme. So how did that happen?
So TJ and TJ does a great job with the music, and you'll hear TJ's music on a number of the different Anchor podcasts, whether it's Keep Off the Borderland or the Geomologist Presents, or he's recorded songs for a number of these people.
Okay,
and,
I didn't know that.
Yeah. A lot of the theme music you hear is from TJ.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he's done podcasts of his own in the past. He's done a couple podcasts of his own, which he doesn't currently have a podcast. And so he had reached out. I don't know if somebody asked. He's a musician, and he also plays in Andy Goodman. I don't know if you're familiar with Andy Goodman in his works. He does, and I'm brain farting right now. the name of his show, I'll look it up here while we're talking. But TJ's a player in his actual play and does some of the editing for his actual play as well. But so anyway, TJ does music on the side, and that's kind of his thing. And so that's always the Expedition Grizzly Peaks and Grizzly Peaks Radio is Andy Goodman's thing. But you can hear TJ on there and TJ's music there as well. But yeah, so TJ has just done these themes for the different shows, and it's great. I'm very lucky that he's done that, because the theme songs he writes, I love the ones he's done for me, but I also love the ones he's done for the other shows.
Well, that's super cool, and call out to TJ for all the work he's putting in for other people's podcasts, and it's great. And Jason, I just want to say I'm really happy to hear that the podcast is continuing on in the new format, and I've been enjoying it so far. The most recent one that I listened to was the RPG Theory Ramblings, and that, to me, I really enjoyed that, because it was just like all the stuff that you can chase yourself in a circle, kind of like, when do we roll dice, when do we not roll dice, like the overarching theory of like what is a role-playing game. And it was a really good discussion. I enjoyed it.
Yeah, that was great. So that was a couple guys from the BS Reform. So Gaming and BS was another show, another podcast that's sadly stopped at this time, although Sean still has stuff going on. But Harrigan is a regular on that Discord, and I've had Harrigan on the show before. And then Gabe also does the Analytic Dice podcast along with Kevin. And Kevin does Salt Heart Games. He has the Burn 2D6 game. But Harrigan is really big into indie RPGs, more so I think than Gabe, although Gabe was also into those. So having those two on is great, because I have some guests that are indie, and I've had indie creators on my show before. I've also done a number of interview with RPG creators and had them as guests. And I do hope to do more of that in the future. But having those guys on is great, because they're not the regular people that are on the show. So I like to change up the voices that are on the show. And I will have some of that coming up in the future. We'll have some voices that people haven't heard on my show before, and keep that variety in there.
Well, like I said, I really like the new format. I hope to hear it for years to come. You've added your voice to the fabric of the hobby, and I think a lot of people have appreciated your take on the hobby, and just like building up that community. Like you've done all the people that have done, the Anchor podcast, and like, I guess a shout out to everybody. But when I reached out to you, I said, I really want to honor the work that you had put in, because it's sometimes a thankless job. And I think you've done a fabulous job building up your podcast over the years, and really enjoy listening to it. So, thanks for all your work on that.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And, I was lucky, because the community was kind of there already. Like I had mentioned Jason Hobbs earlier, who does Random Screed and Hobbs and Friend. And he was instrumental in getting that community going and kind of the initial coalescing of it. And then he's been in and out over the years. He's still around, of course, but yeah. So there was already something there, and then I just happened to be the person that had the time to listen to and call into all the different shows. So kind of slowly became the linchpin. That's not fair. I'm not that instrumental to it, but that's why you heard my voice in all the shows, because I had the time, and then it kind of and then everybody called into my show. So that's kind of how it worked out. But no, I really appreciate you, and I appreciate all the listeners out there, because that's why we do it.
That's great. And I will have links to the podcast, and I'll try to include as many of those other podcasts as I can also. And so, Jason, thanks for coming on the show, and best of luck in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, same to you. I've always enjoyed watching your YouTube interviews, and I look forward to more of those in the future as well.